Another piece to DBT is learning distress tolerance. And it's important to understand what distress tolerance actually is. It's making sure that we're able to cope in a situation without making that situation worse, but it is not distracting ourselves from a situation that keeps us from ever going back and dealing with that situation. So we understand that sometimes our emotions become so overwhelming and so intense that we need to be able to have that distress tolerance to step in and recognize, okay, I need to do something here, because if I don't, I'm going to make a bad choice, or I'm going to have that negative choice, which is going to lead to that negative consequence. And so I don't want to do that. So I need to step back. So we're kind of looking that, and we're doing that in our mind. So the first acronym that we're going to find in distress tolerance is to accept, or accepts. We want to make sure that we're going to distract with accepts. So that's the first piece of it. The A is we want to make sure that we're keeping busy, that we have activities that we're doing, that we're staying busy. We want to make sure that we're contributing, that we're getting our mind off ourselves. We're not focusing on what's going on here, that we are going back to our wise mind skills, that we're participating non-judgmentally, mindfully, effectively, we're participating in a situation. We can look at comparisons. We can say, well, this could be worse. It could be different. It could be something else. We want to be able to recognize emotions, use what we learned in our emotion regulation skills and having opposite emotions, and we want to be able to do something different. We want to do something that's going to give us a different emotion, because our emotions they don't stay forever. They do come and go. We want to be able to push something away, recognizing, okay, I feel this way right now, but because I feel this way, I don't have to act on it. I can push it away. I can do something different right now. Same thing with our thoughts. We want to be able to say, okay, this is the thought that I have now, but I can have a different thought now. And we're participating, we're accepting, or being involved in other activities, so we're able to have some different thoughts. The S in accepts is recognizing our senses, recognizing what's going on around us. That all goes back to wise mind, learning how to describe, observe, and participate in a situation, in an activity. Another piece of distress tolerance is self-soothing, and we're going to learn how to self-soothe with our senses. So what we look at, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and what we touch. And sometimes it's taking a minute and it's going outside and being able to close your eyes and just listen for the birds. Maybe you live by a creek. Maybe you live next to a highway and you can hear the trucks go by, but you're taking yourself and you're putting yourself in a different situation and you're utilizing your senses. It's going down to the beach and taking your shoes off and walking in the sand and recognizing how your feet feel walking in the sand, what that sensation is like. When you get close to the water, is the water cold or is it warm? Do your feet kind of sink into the sand, or are you on top of the sand? Is the sand hot or is the sand cooler? Can you kind of dig your toes into the sand? And we're just going to sit with that. We're going to utilize our senses to help us into a different place. It's important when we talk about distress tolerance to recognize that there's a couple of core concepts with it. That when we're doing these things, we have to understand that there are times to use distress tolerance and there are times not to. There are times when action has to be taken right now, and then there are times when we can step back and do something, maybe wait on something a bit. And so we're able to recognize those situations and recognize, okay, is this something that I have to solve right now? And when we do that, we're going to really ask ourselves 3 questions. And the first one is this a problem that I'm even able to solve? We're going to look at it and say, is this something that I can do anything about? And if the answer is no, then we're gonna work on these distress tolerance skills. The accepts, the self-soothe, we're gonna keep working on those. But if it's something that if I can solve the problem, then we're gonna say, is this the time to solve the problem? Is this an appropriate time to solve the problem? And maybe it's not an appropriate time. So if the answer to that question is no, then we're gonna go back to our distress tolerance skills. But if the answer to that question is yes, am I in wise mind enough to be able to solve this problem right now? The answer is no, then we go into distress tolerance skills. If the answer is yes, then we're going to use those wise mind skills and we're going to work through that problem and solve that problem. These skills are not for long-term use, they're for short-term use. Now, you can use them all the time, so you can use them for the rest of your life, which I consider long-term use, but you're not using them over and over and over and over again in the same situation. You're able to recognize that when emotion builds, you can step back. You're gonna make the here and now better, not worse, when there's crisis or when you're in distress. We're gonna create an ability to relax within a situation and not feel that situation overcome us. We're recognizing how we feel in our body. We're using those wise mind skills to recognize where those emotions are in our body and how we're feeling it and what we can do to let that go. So being able to use these skills to keep yourself busy, get your mind off yourself, say, hey, this could be worse. Doing something to make you feel differently, blocking out those. When we're doing that, we're able to take ourselves into a different place. And what it basically does is gives us power. It gives us that choice that we have. That sometimes when we get into that, there's a situation, there's a thought, there's an emotion, I immediately have a behavior. We don't think that we have choice in that. But it's pretty powerful because we're giving ourselves that power to have that choice. The biggest thing in distress tolerance is we are looking at life differently. We're adopting an accepting attitude at things that happen every day. The last piece of distress tolerance is radical acceptance, and that's probably one of the hardest things to learn, but it's one of the most helpful. And the cool thing about this is as you go through and learn these steps, you're able to get to that point. It's not something that just automatically you have to do one day. You're working on it every day. As you're utilizing this, you're working on it to get to that radical acceptance. So after we've distracted with wise minds, after we've gone through and we've kind of self-soothed with our 5 senses, then what we move into is improving the moment. Now, these are basically the skills that we're learning here are just those skills. I talked earlier about kind of counting to 10 if you get angry. And if that doesn't work, then don't do that again. If you recognize that some of these skills don't work, then utilize different skills. Kind of go through the list until you find something that does work, and then do that. You're going to find that different skills will work differently in different situations. That when you have different feelings or different emotions that come up, there might be different skills to utilize in each of those. And that's okay, but know what works. Part of distress tolerance is learning how to improve the moment. So the next acronym is improve. And we're going to imagine better times, better things. We're going to imagine success. We're going to imagine what's different from right now. We're going to find one thing that's useful in the situation. We're going to find meaning in the situation. And you can be in a situation that you don't like, but being able to go back and say, okay, what can I learn from this? What piece of it can I take from it? That's huge. So being able to look at the situation, step back and say, what can I find that's helpful in this? The P is prayer. We're going to find some quiet time for ourselves where we're reflecting, if we're talking to our higher power, if we're just sitting with it and we're just recognizing that we can reflect on that. The R, relaxation. We want to be able to quiet our body. We want to be able to bring those intense emotions down and calm down with them. We want to make sure that we're doing one thing at a time, that we're not trying to the thing about distress tolerance is not do so much that you're forgetting about what you're doing right now. It's the opposite. It's put yourself into one thing so you can focus on that one thing so that we're not adding emotions, that we're not adding different ways that we feel. Vacation. We can sit and look out the window and daydream for a minute. We can go on a vacation in our mind, kind of take ourselves out of the situation that we're in our minds, and go somewhere. Go to a place that we like. Maybe it's taking a time out and taking a walk around something. Maybe it's doing something like that. And we want to encourage ourselves. We want to make sure that we're validating, that we're telling ourselves, even though this is how we feel and it might be pretty crappy right now, it's still okay. I can do this. I've got skills that I can do. I've learned how to go through this. The next part, kind of the next skill set in distress tolerance, is pros and cons. We want to be able to take a situation, and when we're in that emotion and when we're looking at, this is helping with kind of that opposite emotion, having an opposite emotion. We're going to look and we're going to say, okay, what are the pros and cons of coping and not coping? So we're going to end up I have the kids fold a piece of paper into half both ways so that they've got 4 sections on it. And then we're going to have a pro and con of the coping and pro and con of not coping. And what that is we're looking at how we're going to tolerate or not tolerate the distress that we're in. So if I'm angry right now and I want to get into a fight with somebody, what is going to be a pro of coping with that situation, not getting into an argument? Well, those pros might be not getting into a fight, not having an argument, not having the consequences of that argument or that fight. Recognizing that we can gain trust, that when we're in a situation where we want to do something different, we're making a choice, and that's a good thing. That's a pro to that. When we're looking at the cons of coping, and that's kind of hard, that's kind of contradictory, I guess, sometimes, but it's important to do. We're looking at that and say, okay, well, the fact is I don't get to tell them I'm right, or I don't get to let them know how I feel about a situation. We don't get to kind of make our point. So that tends to be a con in that situation. We don't have the instant gratification, because sometimes when we have those intense emotions and we do something physical, there's a physical release of that emotion. And so a con of coping with the situation is there isn't that physical release. Then when we move down to not coping, and what the pro is of not coping, well, right there, we have that release of emotion. We have that instant gratification. We feel in control of the situation, maybe. Maybe other people will leave us alone. If I get angry enough and I cope in this way, or I'm not coping, I'm not using skills, and I do what I've always done, get in a fight, then maybe others will see how not to treat me. We're kind of sending that message. And again, the last piece is a con of not coping, which generally ends up being consequences. What are those consequences? What's going to happen? Here at ERA, we talk about, kind of RWs, it holds you back in your program, different things like that. So what we're actually doing is we're taking our situation that we're in, and we're giving ourselves enough time, because that emotion is so intense, we're giving ourselves time to look at the pros and cons of each action that I can take here. Hopefully, by the time you've done that, your emotion has lessened. It's not as intense as it once was. So we've effectively been able to tolerate that situation without acting in a way that would be negative. We're going to look at accepting reality. That's the next piece of distress tolerance. We want to make sure that we're observing our breath. Now, you seem to hear a lot of these things over again. This kind of sounds a little bit like wise mind, but when you have wise mind down, you're utilizing that even inside these distress tolerance skills. So we're making sure, and we're just taking it to a different place. Maybe we're not just observing our feelings, but now we're going to look back and we're going to observe our breath. We're going to breathe in, see what that feels like, breathe out, feel what that feels like. Maybe we're going to count our breaths. Maybe we're going to see how we breathe differently when we listen to different music. We're going to stay focused on our breath. That's one of the ways that we're going to accept reality. Again, we might not like the situation that we're in, but we can learn how to live through that situation and how to do something and how to get the most out of that. We want to be able to make sure that we're using our breathing to quiet our mind. It's a huge skill to be able to take a step back, recognize, okay, my breath, and let's just focus on my breath for a moment. And that then also will remove us from that situation when that emotion is so intense. The next piece of this, we want to be able to cultivate a willing response to each situation. So again, what that basically is saying is, instead of doing what you've always done when you have that feeling, we have that situation, we have the thought, and then we have the feeling, instead of always doing what you've always done, we want to recognize that we have a choice in what that response is. And that choice is doing what's needed in each situation. We can recognize what's effective in the situation, what's not effective. It allows us to have connection to where we are in the room with people. It allows us to be aware of those things around us. And so once we're able to do that, then we are able to move into that piece of radical acceptance, which is understanding that in every situation, you might not like it, but you can live through it. And recognizing that there's freedom from suffering requires acceptance from deep within of what it really is. We need to let ourselves go with that instead of fighting it. When we feel a feeling and we feel that maybe that feeling's wrong, we fight it. It's being able to recognize that feelings aren't right or wrong, that feelings are just that feelings. It's the actions that kind of cause the consequences of either being right or wrong. So we want to be able to recognize that my feeling is just that. It's a feeling. When we decide to tolerate the situation or the moment, we are accepting it. We're recognizing that just because we accept it doesn't mean we like it. And that's huge. I think that sometimes when you talk about radical acceptance, you're thinking about, oh, well, I have to like everything. And that's not the case. When we talk about radical acceptance with kids that first come into ERA and they really don't like it here, radical acceptance doesn't mean that they automatically like everything here and that they feel, and all of a sudden they have a good, oh, I'm so happy I'm at ERA. It's not that. It's recognizing that it is what it is. I can't change that. I can change my behavior within that and what I do, but I can't change the fact that I'm here at ERA. Distress tolerance skills. We're accepting, we're self-soothing, we're improving, we're looking at those pros and cons, accepting reality, willingness, radical acceptance.